Welcome to Generation Digital Workforce, the podcast that's here to explore the role of robotic process automation and other digital technologies. Whether you're just getting started or you're looking for advanced strategies and tactics, if you're curious about where human and digital workers are coming together to transform the future of work, then this podcast is for you. All right, let's get into the show.
So welcome to the Blue Prism podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy McKinley from the Blue Prism Financial Services team. Today, we're going to be looking at what 2020 has taught us, a year that started with fear and anxiety and ends with great hope. We're actually recording this podcast on the same morning a major vaccine has been approved for worldwide use. Incredible proof of what people can do when they set their minds to it and work together without fear of failure. We will also be looking into 2021 and see, both in life and in business, how we can take that positivity forward with confidence. 2021 must surely be the year to boldly go. So, without splitting any infinitives and with crystal balls at the ready, I'm delighted to welcome Emily Bristow and David Ormston from our Blue Prism customer success team. Hey guys.
Hey Jeremy.
Okay, so before we get going, could you just tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are, your role and your background? Emily, if you wouldn't mind going first.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm Emily Bristow. I'm a customer success director here at Blue Prism. I've been here 2.5 years now. Like Dave, my role is to work with Blue Prism customers to help them make the most of the product, scale it up, do it right. But before I joined Blue Prism, I was actually a Blue Prism customer myself. I was head of RPA for CGI in the UK. So I've run Blue Prism teams myself before I came over to the dark side, as I call it. But yeah, that's me.
I'm Dave Ormston, customer success director on Emily's team. Doing the same stuff that Emily does on a daily basis, but clearly not so youthfully. I'm, from a past perspective, I'm a bit of a customer success warhorse. I've been involved in the software industry for a while, and in all that time, I've mostly been concentrating on either dealing with customer issues or dealing with customers to avoid issues and to build success out of their investments and stuff. So some of those lessons help me, and I still learn those lessons every day. So that's me.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's dive into our topic. Dave, if I can start with you. I know you were working with financial services companies back in 2008 during the financial crash. And I wonder if you just begin by telling us what parallels and also what differences you see in how businesses have handled the global COVID-19 pandemic.
It's a strange situation, this, Jeremy, because I'm remembering one crisis, existential crisis, and I'm living through the other. Things happen on a daily basis regarding the pandemic situation. But primary differences are in 2008. I think that many of the issues of the Lehman Brothers crash and the fallout from that was somewhat abstract to most of the folks of the world, like outside of the financial services bubble. But it was visceral to financial services at the time and organizations that depended upon them to keep the flow of funding and capital through them. So this pandemic is somewhat different to that because it's visceral to all. I mean, most folks know poor folks who've been affected by COVID, and each of us have been affected by restrictions and other consequences of the pandemic. But the primary difference is that the 2008 crisis seemed to be somewhat abstract to many people, but this one is not abstract to anyone. Both of these crises, as I look back, they triggered corporate threat detected instincts. They're sometimes very helpful and they're sometimes not so helpful. I saw that in 2008 and I see that again now. But that's pretty much it.
Emily, any observations on that?
Well, I was quite young in 2008. So I didn't notice as much of an impact as I've seen with the pandemic. And as Dave said, it's not, back in 2008, it wasn't as impactful to every person on the ground. I know people that have lost relatives during this pandemic, and I've seen some of the other nastier effects of it. So it's been far more overwhelming, I think, for people this time around, for sure.
And I guess the versus the crash, the pandemic hit us, immediately, whereas the crash was a kind of a softened blow over a long period of time. and I guess we just about come through it when the pandemic hit us. So yeah, okay, it's interesting. And Emily, just both personally and professionally, because I think they're both important. What do you think the global pandemic has taught us?
So for me personally, it taught me how to do a pull-up, which was something that I managed to nail in the first 3 months of the pandemic, as I tried to make the most of my time in the gym. But from a wider perspective, from a work perspective, I guess what I've seen is that change is possible. So things that people thought would take years or might never happen have happened really rapidly. Like so many people working from home suddenly. It was able to happen because everybody was the pandemic focused the mind. So people were suddenly all working from home. Flexible working became a thing very, very quickly. So it showed that actually the things that were getting in the way didn't need to get in the way of that progress. And while I think, people will start migrating back to their old ways of working, it won't completely stick. There's been a massive shift to that flexible side of things, which I think can only be positive. And then from an automation perspective, I think the pandemic has really kind of driven home something that Blue Prism have talked about for years as a benefit of RPA, which is the operational agility side of things. And we'll talk about it a little bit more later on, but the ability for companies to pivot quite quickly and deliver things that they couldn't necessarily or wouldn't necessarily have been able to deliver with people in the speed that they were able to deliver it with RPA. I think it's really proven that as a tangible benefit, which I think was trickier to prove before the pandemic.
Yeah, Dave was going to say, I suppose in some ways you think 2020 has been like a springboard to test ways of working. Companies have been tinkering with, particularly in financial services, but not gone at full speed with. I was thinking, this is the year of, I think you're on mute. I've probably heard that a lot. Everything from working from home to digitalization and automation. So do you think of it as a sort of a bubble or a springboard? How would you reflect on that?
Going back to the question, what the pandemic has taught us leading up to your challenge then, Jeremy, I think the freedoms that we'd taken for granted individually and corporately have really been attacked. And I don't run into anyone now who isn't really aware of the freedoms that we'd taken for granted. And I suspect that they won't ever be taken for granted again, which has to be a good thing. I think there's also a personal and corporate realization that people are the most valuable asset in our lives and in our organizations. People caring for people has been one of the most wonderful parts of the situation that we've undertaken recently. And I think also, if I can speak candidly, I think that the set of circumstances has polarized people. I think that some people have been identified as being really dumb, and it has also released the many amazing, clever and philanthropic people in society to achieve great things and basically carry us through this period. So those are my learnings so far from the pandemic. But as regarding what the pandemic has taught humanity, I think we're starting also to raise our eyes up to other pending issues that we've somewhat corporately neglected, such as climate change and political equality and things. So this could be a bit of a watershed. And without trying to sound too trite, I think that we'll rely ever more greatly on reliable RPA to do the stuff that people don't need to. And I think those people will be released to effect the changes in their own lives and in society that are needed to sustain stuff. Is that a bit philosophical, Jeremy, or is that okay?
Well, no, I think, we are, but, I think one of the things I've certainly seen with our customers and just, working through case studies is that they have gone from looking at RPA as a way of, just making processes run more productively or cutting costs. And I genuinely think 2020, we've got a lot of examples with the bounce back loans, with the loan origination, with customer onboarding, where they are actually using it to, repurpose their people to do, better, more valuable work and, to improve accuracy of what they're doing. So they're almost using it as a growth strategy rather than just what automation has historically been, which has just been, around effectivity. So I think that's valid. Emily, would you, obviously you're speaking to customers every day. Have you kind of seen that change?
Yeah. I think I've seen so many customers who've been able to just pivot really quickly, who've had a backlog of work, the usual BAU stuff for a while, and then suddenly COVID comes along and they're able to suddenly switch up to automating things like your mortgage holiday payments or your COVID loans. And I was talking to a customer last week or the week before who it's an organization that supports a lot of the frontline work that's been happening in the fight against COVID, and they just paused their backlog and they put together an automation within a few weeks to do a process of recruiting nurses, just in case, because they figured if there was the influx of recruitment that they were anticipating as a worst case scenario, if they just had to rely on people doing it, they just wouldn't be able to deliver it. So they built this process, and it's there and it's ready if it needs to be used. And I think that kind of brought home, especially to that organization, that it's not all about the cost savings and stuff. It's actually about being able to take it to the next level and deliver, as I said earlier, that operational agility piece. I think it's really brought home that aspect of it. If I may, just going back to what Dave said, I am hopeful that things have changed for the good over the long term, but I think, as with all things, we tend to move on. Like, we forget I think World Health Organization called it COVID amnesia that they were worried about, where after a year or so, people will just sort of forget the trauma that happened with the pandemic, and therefore they won't put the necessary steps and preparations in just in case this happens again. And I think it's just kind of the same with digital transformation. Like, this has given us a massive kick to get things going, and we've seen that with loads of customers. I just hope that people move fast enough within the next 12 months before they start forgetting and start getting distracted by the daily grind of day-to-day priorities. I think this is a really good opportunity on that front.
Do you think that in some ways that in 2020, the tennis net has been lowered a bit? And so, in financial services, the regulators not been maybe quite as strict because, they have to make allowances for, the separation of paperwork and people in their homes. And so, it's just become that little bit easier to make that change because they're not being so strictly regulated, not so strictly controlled, not so strictly enforced. And then part of 2021 is going to be trying to do what they did this year, but with the net raised up a bit higher again, where they're still going to have to sort of meet those regulations. I
guess so. And quite a few organizations are actually using automation itself to make sure that they are hitting regulations. So it's kind of hopefully when that net does go up higher, that actually it won't really make that much of a difference because they already have been preparing for that with automated SLA tracking or audits, etc. I don't know, Dave, what do you think?
I think it's interesting. Again, being the warhorse amongst us, in 2008, it left the emperor feeling extremely naked when the regulation authorities were shown up as having absolutely no plan B. They had absolutely no resilience in the processes that they could implement. They had a cudgel rather than a tool to regulate and manage the financial world in 2008. And they were scared. They just ran around hitting people with sticks completely inappropriately in the early days of that crisis, until in the end there was a little more considered review and some flexibility was built in. Surely I have to say that this pandemic, this is not an accidental thing. Human history alone, last century, was riddled with pandemics. We have to have some flexibility built into these items. The machinery of regulation can no longer surely be inflexible only to break when there is a deviation, a predictable deviation from that. Surely some flexibility has to be built in as we go forward, and I can only hope that will happen after this.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually. Yeah. And so 2021, I mean, Emily's talked about COVID-19 amnesia and that the kind of risk of everyone just going back to doing what they did before because it's a safe haven and it's what they know. But as we come out of the pandemic into a obviously radically changed world, but hopefully return to us in some good shape next year, what do you see as the sort of new set of priorities for companies in 2021? What do you think they should focus on?
It's a very interesting one. In part, the old normal, in quotes, it fueled the current challenges that we just covered some of that. The systemic inflexibility in some of the ways that corporations operate and their licensing entities operate. That inflexibility really can't continue. So again, I really hope that is addressed as we go forward. But also, I've already mentioned environmental issues. This isn't going away. All technologies and process changes should accommodate environmental issues. And on a slightly less serious note, I think every organization will have embraced the value of remote working. I think every organization and individual has improved value of physical interactions, both at work and personally. And every organization surely now knows the value of regular haircuts.
It's very true, very true. And Brexit, we've got Brexit coming up.
Yeah, we do.
Next year, and I'm sure as everybody starts getting vaccinated and COVID hopefully starts disappearing, Brexit will be dominating everything again. I'm not sure everybody really understands what impact that's going to have. So I think that early next year, that's going to be a challenge in itself. And that's kind of when I was saying about COVID amnesia, actually, Brexit might be the thing at the forefront of everybody's mind and might make that amnesia happen faster than we think.
We've had a whole year of not speaking about Brexit, so
well, I kind
back to 2019.
Well, I regret wishing that Brexit wasn't all over the news because I would much prefer that to be the main story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Careful what you wish for.
One of the things we're hearing from you guys sort of pretty loud and clear is around about what happened in 2020 when companies had no option but to be quite bold and to be quite radical just to keep things running, in order to, in financial services, in order to keep running the bank, they had to keep changing the bank. And so I guess, Dave, you wrote a really brilliant blog about conquering fear. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what you say in that, because I'd really like to hear it.
It goes back to 2008 and before that. I mentioned on the introduction piece on this podcast that the threat detected instincts that corporations and humans display when there's a threat, they aren't always helpful. They were really helpful when we were being chased by saber-toothed tigers and people with clubs, but corporately in 2020 they're less useful. Just to explain what I mean by the threat detected instincts, I'm a motorcyclist. Many folks are bikers. One of the things that we have to learn is to look on the road where you want to go, not where identified threats would make you go. As a motorcyclist, right, you steer where you look. So the instinct is to look at the corner, look at the manhole cover. If you want to drive past a manhole cover, you have to look away from the manhole cover. This is completely counterintuitive. That rolls up to corporate level. When presented with the 2008 Lehman Brothers crisis, lots of organizations just clenched. They clenched themselves into a ball, waiting to see how that issue would move, what would happen next. Understandable were it a saber-toothed tiger, but it was not. This was a technocratic challenge. The challenge we face now is a biological challenge with a technocratic resolution to it, hopefully, that you mentioned earlier. So hunkering down really isn't that helpful to us in many cases. What my blog was about is I genuinely feel that instinct in some cases should be and can be subdued, and that you can instead use the forced distraction from the day job, the forced distraction from normal business, in order to ready yourself to emerge from the crisis that you are in more competitive than you entered it. By competitive, I don't just mean dollars and pounds, obviously. I mean more competitive to retain and enable a workforce better, to have a gentler footprint on the world. But guess what? These things also tend to mean better revenue performance. So in 2008, I came up with a thing I called the No Fear Initiative. What I challenged several frozen behaved CEOs at the time and CTOs at the time and asked them the question, what would you do now if you were not afraid? And many of them got angry because they felt that I was pejoratively telling them they were afraid. But once we'd discussed this through and explained that it was purely instinctive and there was no pejorative mention in that we started to answer the questions, which was, what would you do if you weren't afraid? I understand right now you've got people on furlough, you're not spending $1 that you don't need to spend, you're not installing anything that you don't need to because you don't know what's going to happen next. I understand that. What would you do if you weren't afraid of that? And the discussions are huge. This is not a global, right? There are different organizations have different challenges and opportunities, but typically investing in your capability to emerge from this pandemic stronger is a good thing to do. There is typically a temporary distraction from the day job, which is usually one of the top 10 reasons why organizations say, well, I can't do that right now. I can't meet my desired automation target for this workaday procedure because I have too many mortgages to process. This is equivalent to the old adage of, I can't stop to test drive that chainsaw now. I'm chopping all these trees down with an axe. So again, it is not pejorative, my comment here. It is just, please challenge yourselves, organizational leaders and individuals. Could you be using this time to make yourself corporately or personally fitter, as Emily was, to emerge from this pandemic more prepared to go into the brave new world than you would have been just by hunkering down? My blog was an exposition on this. Typically we talk about my customers are not exclusively financial services, but clearly financial services are typically at the forefront of affected businesses when stuff like this occurs, as they are the lifeblood of capital through our entire economy. So please think about it, is all my blog talked about. I've already had some feedback from that as well, Jeremy, interestingly. I have had a couple of indignant folks who say, who are you calling scared, basically? But I've also had some, that's very interesting, email chin stroking. Can you give me a call and we'll talk about it? You know what? I'm happy with both responses. Just don't default by clenching up is my comment.
And I wonder, looking at, the really terrible time that the retail industry is going through, and the retail industry has been going through a terrible time for a long, long time. And this has kind of accelerated what was probably going to happen. Now, I was thinking, I don't know what your view is, but with banking, they've got a bit more time and they know they have to move, particularly the large retail banks, to future operating models. They know they need to change. And so they've not been so badly hit as this. And so for many times, as terrible as the pandemic is, this has kind of been the opportunity for them to put it right, to speed things up and to get on with it. Do you think that's fair?
It's extremely fair. I would also say that since 2008, pretty much every financial organization that I've worked with and been exposed to is resilient. It's far more resilient than it was. So I've learned that there is enormous inertia behind something that has worked, right? So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, a lot of the traditional operating models were broken in 2008 to 11, and what has emerged from that is something that has run pretty competently and seems to be working competently against the pandemic also. So it seems that there is huge inertia in some parts, in some of the more conservative, shall I say, old money businesses. We don't need to do this. We really can clench around our slightly updated operating model and we'll be okay and things can operate as normal. I still say, please look at what can be improved. See what can be improved. Have the ownership and release principle alive inside your business in a review, so that if machines can own the workaday stuff that adds little value to either the humans dispatching it or the organization that is commissioning the work, please consider automating that and release staff to do things that require creativity and interaction. This isn't a hippie thing. This is entirely practicable. Retention of staff of good staff is an extremely useful thing. Pointless attrition is an awful cost and has been for as long as I can remember, even in the financial world. So that's pretty much what I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add to that, one of the things that we're certainly seeing is lots of smaller, I guess, challenger type companies, startups, properly engaging now to look at how they can. They're thinking digital first. So rather than thinking, okay, we need to scale up with people, they're thinking, okay, what can we automate right off the bat, which puts them in a far more competitive position than if they were bringing in a much bigger overhead. So yeah, you've got that corporate inertia, plus you've got smaller companies snapping at the heels.
And I guess aligned to that, so if you're kind of born in the cloud, digital first, then you have a blank piece of paper to start with, and that's kind of has its own challenges, but it's kind of easier. But it makes me think about, Emily, I know you are the Blue Prism champion of our methodology, the Blue Prism robotic operating model, the ROM, as we like to call it. And, for companies of scale who are already somewhere in their journey, I guess it's a kind of a way to institutionalize that change at scale. And I just wondered if you could just spend a few moments, because it's really good, just telling people a little bit about it for some of our customers who are already somewhere in that process.
Yeah, I never pass up an opportunity to talk about the ROM. It's something that whenever I engage with either a brand new customer or just a new customer to the customer success team, I will always talk about the ROM to them. Essentially, it just builds that really solid foundation on which you build everything else. So for anyone that doesn't know about it or hasn't heard me bang on about it before, it's essentially formed of 7 foundations, and it covers everything from the vision that a company has for what they want to do with automation, which is probably the most overlooked, or certainly one of the most overlooked areas of it. Having the right org model in place, whether you're going to be centralized, whether you're going to franchise, having the right standards for build standards or for your process discovery piece or your support model, all of that good stuff in place. And then probably most importantly, your people, making sure that you've got the right people with the right skills in the right roles, and that it's all everybody's operating on a platform that is robust and scalable. So it covers all of those things. And when I go into talk to customers and they've got all of those pieces in place, it is so much easier to then take it to the next level, to add additional digital workers or plug in the complementary technologies, whether it be, intelligent document processing or human in the loop technologies or sentiment analysis, whatever it may be. It's far easier to build those things and expand out and really scale up if you've got that solid foundation in place. It's kind of like the story of if you build it on sand, it's not going to be that robust or scalable. And the robotic operating model really brings that in, where we go in and customers are struggling to scale or have got a lot of challenges. It tends to be because they've got gaps in how they've set things up. So a lot of my life is spent talking about the ROM and going in and plugging those gaps, I guess. So I will always say, whatever your plans are for automation, make sure you get this bit right. And at the moment, while there's so much emphasis on digital transformation, etc., it's the perfect time to address that and make sure that it's built and that it's solid.
And Dave, just thinking of something you said to me last time we spoke, do you think almost like, now's quite a good time to look at it when we've almost got a pause in business for some companies? So it's almost that a window of opportunity for companies to assess what they're doing, and then
it absolutely is. I have probably 20% of Emily's expertise in the ROM. I kneel at her feet regarding the details of it. But I will say to the listeners of the podcast, the ROM is not some kind of business Esperanto that must be pointlessly learnt. in order to achieve a success in automation. It is a straight edge, a well-articulated straight edge that allows any organization to demonstrate its crookedness from likely best practice. It is awesome, and the timing is exactly right for the ROM. So this is not a time to, you're not starting from nothing. If you start from the ROM, you can start to map your existing governance and processes and actualities onto the ROM. So you won't need to reinvent everything, and you can just concentrate on the gaps. This is not a pointless thing to learn that's going to delay your initiation into automation. This will accelerate it massively. So this is exactly the right time, Jeremy. Yes.
Good, thank you. And so, the year ends, we think, on a huge high from where we started at the beginning of the year. And what scientists have done is quite honestly incredible to produce a vaccine in such a short period of time. So, 2021 not too far away. I just wanted to end by asking you both, what your New Year's wishes for your customers would be. Maybe Emily, starting with you, just thinking about what you would really ask of your customers next year.
Yeah, I want them to be really ambitious. So my day-to-day dealings is talking to head of RPAs, head of intelligent automations across various different organizations. And the one thing I would really want them, to read Dave's article, which I've shared quite widely, but also, just to take time to look up from the day-to-day grind, the internal politics, all those things that I know, having done it, you constantly get pulled into, and just using the end of what is a pretty rubbish year to reset, take stock, and look at actually what could we achieve with this, rather than, okay, by the end of 2021, I want to have automated 10 processes. Actually, let's speak in bigger terms. I want to have deployed a digital workforce that can, fully augment the HR department or whatever it may be, but just think a lot bigger. I would love to see customers thinking on a much bigger scale. Obviously I would, because we sell Blue Prism licenses, but I think it's got a real opportunity now to be really transformative, as long as people can look up from the desk.
Brilliant. And Dave?
I would really love the leadership in every organization to consider Theodore Roosevelt's quote, which is one of the quotes that has driven me through my life. He said, in any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing to do is the wrong thing. And the worst thing you can do is nothing. I would like them to consider moving forward actively, considering what is best for all, not frozen by instinctive inertia.
Fantastic. What a better way to end than Theodore Roosevelt. Well, thanks to both of you for being on the show. To our audience, thanks very much for joining us today as well. We hope you've enjoyed hearing from Emily and Dave, and please be sure to read Dave's blog on blueprism.com, and the link will be sent out to you. Thanks very much.
You've been listening to Generation Digital Workforce. If you want to hear more about RPA, AI, and other cognitive technologies that are shaping the future of work, join us next time as we continue to go deeper on these topics with industry innovators and experts. To make sure you never miss a future episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. And if you've liked what you heard today, please leave us a review. It's one of the best ways to help more people find valuable content. For show notes and more info, visit us at blueprism.com/podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.